On a stormy night, Agent Angela Johnson's routine drive home takes a dramatic turn when a police patrol car follows her into a quiet, deserted town. What starts as a routine traffic stop quickly escalates into a tense confrontation fueled by Officer Mark Anderson's prejudices. Despite Anderson's aggressive behavior, Angela remains composed and reveals her DEA badge, causing a startling shift in the power dynamic. As Anderson's anger turns into shock and regret, Angela stands firm, embodying resilience and authority. This harrowing encounter shines a light on the deep-seated issues of prejudice and the heavy cost of misjudgment. If you are not subscribed, I recommend you subscribe and activate the bell so you don't miss any videos. On a stormy night, Agent Angela Johnson, drained from a grueling day at work, found herself navigating the winding roads of a small, sleepy town on her way home. The storm outside was relentless. Torrential rain fell in thick sheets, obscuring the road and turning her headlights into mere pools of light against the dark, rain-soaked asphalt. Angela was dressed casually in jeans and a hoodie, blending in with the locals, a stark contrast to her usual professional attire. Despite her high-profile career, she looked like any other weary traveler caught in the tempest. The town she was driving through seemed almost deserted, the silence broken only by the rhythmic drumming of rain against her car roof. It was as if the storm had swallowed up the usual sounds of human activity, leaving only the oppressive hush of a stormy night. As Angela drove, a growing unease settled over her. Her heart began to race when she noticed a pair of headlights glowing ominously in her rearview mirror. The steady pulse of red and blue lights illuminated the night behind her, signaling that a police car was tailing her. Angela's grip on the steering wheel tightened instinctively. She hadn't committed any traffic violations, but the implications of being a black woman in a town known for its racial biases were not lost on her. The police car followed closely, its lights growing more insistent. Angela's mind raced with apprehension. Why was she being pursued? She had obeyed all traffic laws. The growing anxiety was palpable as the officer's car remained glued to her bumper, intensifying her sense of dread. She considered the Levia badge tucked away in her purse. Should she display it to clarify her identity and credentials, or would that exacerbate the situation? Torn between the need to prove her legitimacy and the fear of provoking a hostile reaction, Angela wrestled with her options. The rain seemed to amplify her stress, creating a cocoon of tension inside her vehicle. The sound of police sirens sliced through the night air, compelling her to pull over. Angela's stomach knotted with apprehension. The prospect of facing an unknown threat heightened her fears. Even with her extensive experience in high-pressure situations, this encounter felt profoundly personal and unsettling. Her intuition told her this was not merely a routine stop. With a deep, steadying breath, Angela guided her car to the side of the road. The street remained eerily empty, and the rain continued its unrelenting assault, contributing to the ominous atmosphere. As she stopped, her heart pounded fiercely, a blend of trepidation and anticipation coursing through her veins. The flashing lights of the police vehicle painted the night in unsettling hues of red and blue, casting long, eerie shadows across the scene. Angela shivered, sensing that this was more than a simple traffic stop. She remained vigilant, preparing for whatever might unfold. The police car's driver's side door swung open with a decisive clunk, and Officer Mark Anderson stepped out into the storm. Angela had heard troubling rumors about Anderson. In the small town's whispers, he was known for his aggressive demeanor and discriminatory attitudes toward black residents. Reports of his unjust treatment had circulated, and it was commonly believed that he harbored biases that influenced his interactions. As Anderson approached her vehicle, his heavy, deliberate footsteps and the stern set of his face signaled that this encounter would not be routine. The way his hand hovered near his gun's holster further suggested that he was not approaching her with the intention of a casual chat. Angela's fingers tightened around the steering wheel as she fought to maintain her composure. The growing pressure of the situation weighed heavily on her. Despite her experience with officers like Henderson, each encounter felt as fraught as the last, with no familiarity offering any comfort. Henderson approached the car window with a deliberate stride, his presence looming large. He rapped sharply on the glass with his flashlight, the sound echoing through the damp, chill night air as the relentless rain pounded against the vehicle. With a deliberate motion, Angela rolled down the window, allowing the cold, biting wind and the cacophony of the rain to fill the car. "License and registration," Henderson barked, his tone harsh and dripping with hostility. Angela's heart pounded as she composed her face into a neutral mask, consciously suppressing the anxiety that simmered beneath the surface. She reached for her purse with deliberate slowness, trying to avoid any movements that might be perceived as threatening. As she handed over her license and registration, she met Henderson's gaze squarely, striving to convey calm and control despite the turbulence inside. Henderson grabbed the documents with a brusque motion, barely sparing them a glance before his eyes snapped back to Angela with a penetrating, accusatory stare. "What exactly are you doing in this town?" he demanded, his voice cutting through the night air like a razor-sharp blade. "You don't belong here." The suspicion in his voice was palpable, his words dripping with disdain. Angela's pulse quickened, a jolt of anxiety surging through her, but she forced herself to stay calm and composed. "I'm just passing through, officer," she replied, her voice steady and resolute despite the tension. "I'm heading home after work." She hoped that her straightforward explanation would ease the tension, but Henderson's narrowed eyes and stern expression suggested he was unconvinced. If you are still watching this video and find these stories useful, please comment number 1 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. Thank you for your valuable time. "Work, ha?" Henderson echoed, his tone heavy with skepticism and derision. "And what kind of work do you do?" His words carried a clear implication that he doubted her claim, as if it were inconceivable for her to have a legitimate occupation. "I'm a Liavia agent," Angela said firmly, aiming to project authority without sounding arrogant. She didn't want to come across as boastful, but she hoped that revealing her profession might temper Henderson's hostility. Instead, Henderson's demeanor seemed to harden further. "You say so?" he scoffed, his voice laden with sarcasm. "That's a good one." His derision was evident as he scrutinized her appearance, his disdain unmistakable. "What's a Liavia agent doing out here in the middle of nowhere, dressed like that? Do you think you can just flash a badge and get away with anything?" Angela's jaw tightened, her patience wearing thin under the weight of Henderson's condescension. The way he treated her, as if she were a criminal, only fueled her frustration. "I'm not trying to get away with anything," she said, her voice tinged with the frustration she had been trying to suppress. Little did she know that this night would become a battleground of power and prejudice, as Henderson's hardened demeanor leaned closer to her window, his face mere inches from hers. Angela remained stoic, her resolve unyielding at the wheel. "I don't like your attitude," Henderson growled, his voice vibrating with barely contained anger. "And I don't care that you claim to be a Liavia agent. You're not untouchable." The threat in his voice was veiled but unmistakable, the tension between them so thick it felt almost physical. Angela understood that this had escalated beyond a routine traffic stop. It had become a clash of wills, with Henderson determined to assert his authority. His eyes gleamed with barely suppressed rage as he leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "Get out of the car," he commanded, his tone brooking no argument. Angela met his gaze with unwavering resolve, her calm demeanor a stark contrast to the storm brewing outside and the storm of aggression before her. "Sir, I haven't done anything wrong. There's no reason for me to get out of the car," she responded, her voice firm yet respectful. She was well aware of her rights and had no intention of succumbing to his intimidation. Henderson's face contorted into a snarl, his grip on the door handle tightening until his knuckles turned a ghostly white. "You're disobeying a lawful order," he spat, his voice laced with venom and fury. Fueled by the challenge from Angela, someone he had always considered beneath him, Henderson felt his heart racing with an intensity that mirrored his boiling anger. Angela's defiance was a direct affront to his authority, and although she felt her own heart pounding fiercely within her chest, she fought to maintain a calm exterior. "I'm not disobeying anything," she said, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to control it. "But I haven't broken any laws, and I don't understand why you're insisting that I get out of the car." Her words only ignited Henderson's fury further. He was accustomed to people shrinking away from him, not standing their ground, and even less so a black woman challenging him so openly. The sheer audacity of her resistance was intolerable to him. His face flushed with rage, and his knuckles turned an even paler shade as he gripped the car door with a white-knuckled tightness. "I said get out of the car," he bellowed, his voice reverberating through the night as the rain began to pour down heavily, adding to the oppressive atmosphere. Without allowing Angela a moment to react, Henderson yanked the door open with a force that made the entire car tremble. Angela's breath caught in her throat as he grabbed her roughly by the arm, dragging her out of the vehicle with such violent force that she almost lost her footing. The rain soaked her almost instantly, plastering her hair to her face and drenching her clothes through. Her instincts screamed at her to resist, to defend herself, but she knew that any resistance might only escalate the situation. Nevertheless, she couldn't just acquiesce without a fight. "Officer, you're making a mistake," she managed to say, striving to keep her voice steady despite the harsh grip he had on her arm. But her plea was drowned out by his seething anger. "Shut up," Henderson spat, shoving her forcefully against the side of the car with such impact that a sharp, jarring pain shot through her shoulder. Angela grimaced in pain but fought to maintain her composure, determined not to lose her dignity no matter how much it hurt. Henderson, still consumed by his unrestrained fury, pressed her harder against the cold, unforgiving metal, his hands digging into her flesh as he tried to pin her down. The rain-soaked pavement beneath her feet and the weight of his aggression made it nearly impossible for her to keep her balance. Angela had faced physical confrontations before, but this was different. It wasn't just a matter of being a federal agent. It was about the color of her skin and the misplaced sense of superiority Henderson believed he wielded over her. As Henderson forced her down, Angela's bag slipped off her shoulder and fell to the ground, its contents scattering across the wet pavement. Lipstick, keys, and papers were strewn in the puddles, creating a chaotic mess. Yet among the scattered debris, something metallic and shiny caught the faint glow of the streetlight, a glimmer that drew Henderson's gaze. He froze, his eyes locked onto the object now lying in the rain-soaked ground. Angela's DEA badge, a symbol of her authority, lay exposed in the puddles before him. At that moment, everything seemed to come to a standstill. The relentless rain, the howling wind, even the palpable tension in the air, all seemed to freeze as Henderson's realization struck him with full force. His eyes remained glued to the badge, and the gravity of his actions began to hit him with a heavy impact. The rage that had overtaken him moments before ebbed away, replaced by a dawning sense of shock and disbelief. Angela, still on the ground, remained silent, her eyes fixed on Henderson as the truth of his actions slowly began to dawn on him. Henderson staggered back, his face draining of color as the rain continued to fall around them, an unrelenting reminder of the mess he had created. His mouth moved as if to speak, but no words came out. The power dynamic had irrevocably shifted, and Angela now held the upper hand. Slowly, she rose to her feet, never breaking her gaze from Henderson's horrified eyes. He babbled incoherently, desperate to explain and undo the damage he had caused, but it was far too late for that. The damage was irrevocable, an unchangeable fact now glaringly evident. "You're with the DEE," he stammered, his voice barely more than a trembling whisper. The self-assured demeanor that had characterized Anderson mere moments ago had evaporated, leaving a gaping void filled with palpable fear. Angela chose not to respond immediately. Instead, she methodically bent down to retrieve her badge from the ground, taking a moment to wipe it clean with her drenched sweatshirt. She then held it up, allowing its metallic surface to catch the sparse light of the street lamps, and fixed him with a gaze as unyielding as steel. "Yes," she confirmed, her voice sharp and unwavering, cutting through the night air like a blade. "I am." Henderson's expression shifted dramatically, morphing into a blend of terror, remorse, and escalating horror. The gravity of his actions assaulting a federal agent propelled by blind prejudice hit him with a crushing force. The realization of his grave misjudgment was undeniable. The rain persisted, its steady rhythm the only sound in the now tense and charged night. As Anderson stared at the badge, its surface glinting under the dim glow of the streetlights, he felt the crushing weight of his actions bearing down on him. The aggressive bravado that had fueled his actions moments earlier had dissipated, leaving him with only an overwhelming sense of dread as he confronted the enormity of his mistake. If you are still watching this video and find these stories useful, please comment number 2 below to let me know that. Thank you for your valuable time. Angela remained resolute on the damp ground, her clothes plastered to her body by the relentless rain, but her gaze remained fixed unwaveringly on Henderson's face. She observed the transformation of his expression, noting how the anger and arrogance that had once hardened his features had evaporated, giving way to palpable fear and uncertainty. Henderson's initial confidence and sense of superiority had vanished, leaving behind a man ensnared in the chilling realization of the repercussions of his actions. Angela did not rush to rise, deliberately allowing Henderson the time to fully grasp the severity of his error. Henderson's mouth worked open and shut, his thoughts racing in a frantic bid to find some coherent explanation. "I didn't know," he eventually managed, his voice quivering as he took a hesitant step backward. The authoritative tone that had marked his earlier words was now replaced by trembling insecurity and doubt. "I didn't realize who you were." Angela rose slowly from the soaked pavement, her movements deliberate and controlled. Her eyes never wavered from Henderson's, and despite the rain continuing to trickle from her hair and saturate her clothes, she stood tall and unflinching. Her presence commanded an even greater authority now, and she needed no further words for Henderson to comprehend the magnitude of his transgression. Henderson's mind was a maelstrom of panic as he scrambled for a way to extricate himself from the mess he had created. "I thought you were someone else," he blurted out, his words stumbling over one another in his haste to justify himself. "You didn't show your ID, and you didn't comply. I was just doing my job." Yet even as he spoke, he knew his justifications were hollow and inadequate. His excuses crumbled under the crushing weight of the truth of his actions. Angela's silence and composed demeanor were more damning than any verbal accusation could have been. "I didn't mean to hurt you," Henderson added weakly, his voice almost pleading. Desperation laced his words as he sought to justify his actions, to somehow make his wrongdoing seem less egregious. But when he met Angela's gaze, he saw the stark reality: there was no justification. He had crossed a line that could never be undone. Finally, Angela broke the silence, her voice cold and firm, each word slicing through the night air like a blade. "You didn't know," she said, "because you didn't care." Henderson's prejudiced perception had led him to see what he wanted to see: a black woman who didn't belong in his narrow view of the world, and he had acted on his biases without question. The raw truth of her words made Henderson shudder, their undeniable power impossible to ignore. He opened his mouth to speak, to defend himself, but no words emerged. The reality of what he had done and to whom he had done it sank deeper into his conscience with each passing second. If you're still watching this video and find these stories insightful, please comment the number 2 below so I know you're still engaged. Thank you for your valuable time. "I was just trying to do my job," Henderson repeated weakly, but even to his ears the words sounded pitiful. Angela lifted her badge, making it visible in the dim light, and spoke with a controlled fury that made Henderson shrink. "Your job is to protect and serve, not to harass and assault individuals based on the color of their skin," she said, her voice carrying a weight that made Henderson tremble. He reached for his radio, his mind a whirl as he grappled with the magnitude of his mistake. His entire career, his very sense of self, felt as if it were slipping away, replaced by a chilling awareness of the consequences he faced. Angela watched him intently, her expression a mask of steely resolve. She understood that the power dynamic had shifted, and that this confrontation was far from over. As the rain continued to pour, Angela felt a sense of clarity and purpose settle over her. She recognized the responsibility and authority now resting in her hands. Taking a deep breath, she stood upright, her movements deliberate and controlled. Despite the torrential rain, she shook her drenched clothes and then crouched to retrieve her badge from the wet pavement. The weight of the badge in her hand felt heavier now, symbolizing the gravity of the power and responsibility she bore. She turned the badge between her fingers before lifting it once more, making it clear to Henderson that his actions would not go unanswered. "I am Special Agent Angela Johnson with the FBI," she announced, her voice cutting through the stifling atmosphere with undeniable authority. Each syllable was enunciated with precision, slicing through the palpable tension that hung heavily in the air. "And you have just made a grave error, Officer Henderson." The realization of her words struck Henderson with the force of a sledgehammer. His face drained of all color as the full weight of the situation dawned on him. The veneer of confidence he had maintained until now shattered in an instant, replaced by an expression of sheer panic. Angela stood tall, her badge gleaming in the dim light, a stark symbol of the power she wielded, power that Henderson had dangerously underestimated. He had tried to assert dominance over her, to impose his authority, but the dynamic had shifted so drastically that he was left reeling. He recognized deep within that he was in serious jeopardy, and his mind raced frantically in search of a way out. Yet he was too stunned to think clearly. "Look, I didn't know," Henderson stammered, his voice trembling with the weight of his fear. "I didn't mean to. I thought you were someone else." His attempt at justification was feeble at best, but it quickly dissolved under Angela's unwavering gaze. Her expression remained resolute and unyielding, her eyes fixed on his with a potent mix of disappointment and resolve. "You didn't know because you didn't bother to know," she retorted, her tone calm yet firm. "You perceive me as a threat not because of any actual wrongdoing on my part, but solely due to the color of my skin. You didn't make any effort to ask questions or assess the situation, you simply made assumptions." Henderson instinctively recoiled, his hands shaking as he scrambled to defend himself. "I was just doing my job," he pleaded, his voice growing increasingly desperate, but Angela's patience had worn thin. She cut him off with a piercing look. Your job is to protect and serve, not to profile and assault innocent people, she asserted, her voice rising with intensity. What led you to believe I was a threat? Was it because I was driving through this town at night, or because I am black, and you presumed I didn't belong here? Henderson opened his mouth to reply, but no words emerged. He was acutely aware that no response could adequately justify his actions. Angela did not grant him the luxury of time to find an excuse. She advanced towards him, her presence commanding, her eyes fixed on his with a fierce intensity that made him squirm. This isn't just about you and me, officer, she continued, her voice low but imbued with unwavering strength. This is about a systemic issue that allows individuals like you to believe it's acceptable to treat black people as criminals solely based on their appearance. You seem to think you're above the law, that you can act with impunity, but you're mistaken. Henderson swallowed hard, feeling as though the weight of his actions was suffocating him, like a heavy shroud. I'm sorry, he murmured, his voice barely audible. I didn't intend for this to escalate, but Angela was unmoved by his apology. It was too little, too late. The harm had been inflicted, and he could no longer evade the consequences. You will need to explain this to your superior, she said firmly, leaving no room for negotiation, and you will have to face the repercussions of your actions. I will be reporting this incident and expect a thorough investigation. Henderson's shoulders sagged under the crushing weight of guilt and fear. He understood that the consequences of his actions were inevitable. Angela, however, had already moved on mentally. She turned away, the rain continuing to fall around her, but she no longer felt it as an encumbrance. Instead, she experienced it as a cleansing force, washing away the remnants of the confrontation and leaving her with a renewed sense of clarity and purpose. As she turned and walked away, Angela heard Henderson's voice trembling as he called after her, but she did not pause. She was fully aware that her battle was far from over, but she also recognized that her actions that night had made a significant impact. That realization was worth more to her than any amount of rain or hardship. In those final moments of their confrontation, Angela could see the intense struggle in Henderson's eyes, a profound internal conflict between the man he once was and the harsh reality he was now confronted with. This was the critical moment to deliver a message he could not ignore. If you are still watching this video and find these stories useful, please comment number 3 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. Thank you for your valuable time. Officer Henderson, she began, her voice steady and commanding, cutting through the tempest of his thoughts with piercing clarity. This isn't merely about what happened tonight. This is about a systemic failure that has allowed you to use your badge as a shield for far too long, allowing you to act on your prejudices with impunity. But that stops now. Oh. Henderson visibly shuddered at her words, his body betraying an involuntary reaction to the gravity of her statement. Despite the storm raging around them, his eyes remained locked on Angela. The truth in her words was like a scalpel, slicing through the remnants of his self-deception with precision. Angela stepped closer, her voice firm and resolute, slicing through the tense air. Justice isn't about leveraging power for personal advantage. It's about ensuring fairness, equality, and safeguarding those who cannot defend themselves. It means upholding the law with integrity, not contorting it to suit your ends. Until you grasp this fundamental truth, you are not a protector. You are merely another individual hiding behind a badge to conceal your misuse of authority. You must confront the reality of who you are, Henderson, and make a choice. Persist on this destructive path, or undertake the arduous and painful journey of reform. If you choose to ignore this moment, your career and your life will slowly unravel, consuming you from within. Her words struck him with undeniable clarity. The relentless downpour felt like a massive wave crashing over him, leaving Henderson standing drenched in the torrential rain. He was soaked not only by the storm, but also by the harsh and chilling realization of the man he had become. For the first time, he felt the crushing weight of his actions, a burden so heavy it threatened to bring him to his knees. Yet, he understood that this was a moment of reckoning from which there was no escape, regardless of how desperately he wished otherwise. The next morning, an oppressive tension hung over the police station like a foreboding cloud. The events of the previous night had spread through the department with alarming speed, reducing the usual morning banter and camaraderie to mere whispers and uneasy silence. As Anderson entered the station with a heavy heart and a bowed head, he felt the weight of every pair of eyes on him. The familiar faces of his colleagues now avoided him, engrossed in muted conversations and deliberately shunning eye contact. The unspoken judgment was palpable. They were all aware of why he was there, and no one was willing to be the first to confront the grim reality of what had transpired. His heart pounded in his chest, the thudding echoing in his ears as he was summoned to the chief's office. The air in the hallway felt suffocating, almost tangible, as if the walls themselves were closing in, amplifying the fear that coiled in his stomach. The badge that once symbolized pride and purpose now felt like a burdensome weight, a constant reminder of the reckoning he was about to face. When he entered the chief's office, he found the chief seated behind his desk. The chief's stern demeanor and years of experience, etched into every line of his face, were as unyielding as ever. Today, however, that face was a mask of inscrutable resolve. "Sit down," Henderson the chief said, his voice devoid of the warmth and camaraderie that had once characterized their interactions. It was not a polite request, but a firm command. Henderson obeyed, his hands slightly trembling as he lowered himself into the chair across from the chief's desk. He had anticipated this moment, but knowing what was coming did nothing to alleviate the tight knot of anxiety forming in his chest. The chief began the meeting with a tone that was formal but unmistakably cold, sending a shiver down Henderson's spine. "We have received a formal complaint from Special Agent Angela Johnson," the chief announced, sliding a thick, ominous file across the desk toward Henderson. "The situation is serious, Mark. More serious than you can imagine." As Henderson's eyes fell on the file, his heart began to race uncontrollably. A wave of fear surged through him, each word from the chief seeming to hit with the force of a physical blow. The file was packed with disturbing headlines that seemed to scream accusations at him: racism, abuse of power, assaulted agent. As he flipped through the pages, each successive one felt like a punch to the gut, dismantling any hope he might have clung to that the situation was anything less than a full-blown crisis. What had started as a regrettable decision was now spiraling into a nightmare, threatening not only his career but the integrity of the entire department and the trust of the community they serve. The chief's gaze remained unyielding and devoid of sympathy. "We are under intense scrutiny now," he continued, his voice steady but carrying an unmistakably serious edge. "The department's reputation is hanging by a thread. The consequences of this will be severe." The word "suspended" echoed in Henderson's mind, a harsh mantra that drowned out everything else. The years of dedicated service and the painstakingly built reputation all seemed to crumble away in front of him. He was no longer the confident, respected agent he once was. As he rose to leave, the chief's final words cut through the air like a blade. "If you manage to come back, you'd better be a changed man." If you are still watching this video and find these stories useful, please comment number 4 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. Thank you for your valuable time. Henderson nodded, unable to trust himself to speak. The weight of his situation bore down on him as he left the office, moving through the building in a daze. Outside, the scene was grim. A throng of reporters had gathered, their cameras flashing like a barrage of strobe lights. As he made his way to his car, the city that had once felt like a familiar haven now seemed alien and hostile. Faces that had once greeted him with respect now turned away in disdain, and Henderson felt his reputation disintegrating like sand slipping through his fingers. It dawned on him with startling clarity that he was not just facing the fallout of a single poor decision, but confronting the cumulative result of a lifetime of choices that had led him to this critical juncture. Arriving home, he was engulfed by an oppressive sense of loneliness. The suspension felt like a heavy physical burden, and the silence of his empty house, once a source of comfort, now felt suffocating. Angela's words reverberated in his mind. "This isn't just about losing your job. It's about changing the way people like you think and act." Henderson realized he could no longer ignore this truth. To do so would be to repeat the same mistakes and perpetuate a cycle of harm and regret. But embracing change was daunting. It required him to confront deeply ingrained errors and mistakes that struck at the very core of his self-image and his role in the world. Accepting this transformation meant embarking on a challenging journey of self-improvement, a path fraught with discomfort and the relentless challenge of becoming a better person, one more aligned with the principles of justice and equality. Despite the overwhelming fear and guilt, Henderson found a flicker of hope within himself. It was a fragile but persistent belief that change was possible, that he could learn from this experience and emerge as a better man, a more just officer. Though he knew the road to redemption would be arduous, he clung to the hope that with effort and courage, it was attainable. Meanwhile, Angela continued her relentless pursuit of justice, her resolve only strengthened by her recent confrontation with Henderson. The encounter had served as a stark reminder of the pervasive injustice she was fighting against, reinforcing her commitment to challenging and dismantling the entrenched systems that perpetuated racism and the abuse of power. To Angela, Henderson represented a mere fragment of a much larger systemic issue. Her focus remained unwaveringly on ensuring that the injustices faced by Henderson were not repeated, and that no one else would endure similar suffering. As days turned into weeks, Henderson found himself at a pivotal juncture. He was confronted with a profound decision: to retreat into a realm of bitterness and regret, or to embark on a challenging path of self-examination, personal development, and potential redemption. The path he chose would not only shape the trajectory of his future, but also impact the nature of his legacy and how he would be remembered by others. Thank you for joining us in this in-depth exploration of human behavior, societal complexities, and personal fortitude. Throughout this video, we have delved into a range of powerful and thought-provoking themes, from the psychological hurdles that aging individuals face to the systemic issues of racial prejudice and the ongoing battle for justice. We have examined critical aspects of our social landscape. We have also discussed the significance of maintaining relevance in a swiftly evolving world, the balance between personal dignity and external pressures, and how intense moments of confrontation, such as Angela Johnson's experience, can uncover deeper societal dynamics and catalyze meaningful change. So what resonated with you the most? What lesson or insight will you take from this video and incorporate into your own life? Perhaps it was a reflection on how to maintain your independence as you age, or a renewed commitment to stand up against injustice in your community. Or maybe Angela's ability to stay composed under pressure inspired you to practice greater patience and mindfulness in your inner interactions. We invite you to share your thoughts in the comments below. Tell us about one key takeaway that stood out to you and how you plan to apply it in your own life. We'd love to foster a community where everyone can learn from one another's experiences and grow together. And if you found value in this content, don't forget to like this video, share it with others, and subscribe to our channel. Your engagement helps us continue bringing you insightful stories, reflections, and discussions that matter. Remember, each small action we take can make a big difference, not just in our lives, but in the world around us.